Emotional mastery begins with ruthless self-observation. Before you attempt to control the world, you must first dissect your own reactions. Notice what triggers anger, jealousy, fear, or excitement. Do not judge these emotions. Study them like a strategist studying enemy movements. When you understand your emotional patterns, you stop being their servant. You create distance between feeling and action. In that space of distance, power is born, because control over self always precedes control over circumstances and people. Detach from the need for approval. Many lose power because they crave validation. When your decisions depend on applause, you become predictable and manipulable. Train yourself to act according to long-term advantage rather than temporary praise. Accept that criticism and misunderstanding are inevitable. Emotional independence is forged when you no longer adjust your principles to fit the comfort of others. The less you need reassurance, the more unshakable your presence becomes in any environment. Control your reactions, not your feelings. Emotions arise naturally. Suppression without understanding creates internal weakness. Instead, acknowledge the emotion internally, but choose your external response deliberately. A calm face during chaos confuses opponents and stabilizes allies. Reaction is a choice, even when emotion is automatic. Mastery lies in the pause between stimulus and response. That pause is your throne. From it, you decide whether to advance, retreat, or remain silent. Learn to use silence as a strategic weapon. People reveal their weaknesses when confronted with stillness. When you speak less, your words gain weight. Silence prevents emotional leakage and gives you time to analyze situations objectively. It also unsettles those who expect immediate reactions. In negotiations, arguments, and conflicts, silence often communicates more strength than loud defense. When you refuse to be rushed emotionally, you dictate the tempo of every interaction. Detach from outcomes while remaining committed to effort. Emotional turbulence often comes from obsessing over results. Focus instead on preparation, discipline, and calculated action. When success arrives, accept it calmly. When failure strikes, analyze it coldly. Neither extreme should disturb your inner balance. Emotional mastery means stability under both victory and defeat. The world fluctuates constantly, but your internal state should remain measured, deliberate, and firmly under your command. Train yourself to separate perception from reality. Most emotional reactions are born not from facts, but from interpretations. When someone disrespects you, pause and question the meaning you assign to it. Is it truly an attack or merely projection from their insecurity? By challenging your first interpretation, you weaken the emotional charge attached to it. Clear perception sharpens strategy. When you see situations as they are, not as you fear them to be, you gain intellectual dominance. Accept that fear is information, not an enemy. Fear exposes what you value and where you feel vulnerable. Instead of denying it, dissect it. Ask what specific loss you are afraid of and how realistic that loss truly is. Fear becomes manageable when defined precisely. Undefined fear grows into panic, but defined fear transforms into preparation. Emotional mastery requires turning instinctive anxiety into calculated readiness rather than impulsive retreat or reckless aggression. Practice controlled exposure to discomfort. Deliberately place yourself in challenging conversations, difficult tasks, and uncertain environments. Each exposure strengthens emotional endurance. Comfort breeds fragility, while calculated hardship builds resilience. When you voluntarily experience discomfort, you reduce the power it holds over you. Over time, pressure becomes familiar rather than threatening. This familiarity allows you to remain composed in moments that overwhelm others, giving you a decisive psychological advantage. Detach from personalizing every conflict. Not every disagreement is an attack on your identity. Strategic thinkers analyze conflicts in terms of interests and objectives, not ego. When ego dominates, emotions flare uncontrollably. By focusing on outcomes instead of pride, you maintain clarity. Sometimes retreat is smarter than confrontation. Sometimes silence is stronger than retaliation. Emotional discipline means choosing responses based on advantage, not wounded self-image. Build an inner code that guides your actions regardless of external chaos. When your values are clearly defined, you are less likely to react impulsively. Decide in advance how you handle betrayal, disrespect, failure, and success. Predetermined principles reduce emotional confusion during crises. Without an inner framework, you drift with circumstances. With one, you stand firm. Stability does not come from a calm world, it comes from a well-structured mind. Guard your vulnerabilities carefully. Never reveal emotional wounds to those who have not earned your trust. Information about your fears, insecurities, or unresolved pain can be weaponized against you. Strategic restraint does not mean dishonesty, it means discretion. Share selectively and intentionally. When others cannot easily read your weaknesses, they cannot easily exploit them. Emotional privacy creates psychological armor that protects your long-term influence and stability. Learn the discipline of delayed reaction. Immediate responses are often driven by ego or impulse. By postponing your reply, whether in anger, excitement, or disappointment, you allow logic to regain control. Time cools intensity and reveals hidden angles within a situation. Many conflicts dissolve when not fueled instantly. A delayed reaction demonstrates confidence and control, signaling that you are not easily provoked or manipulated by temporary emotional surges. Understand the emotional motivations of others. People are rarely driven purely by logic. Pride, fear, ambition, and insecurity shake their decisions. Observe patterns in behavior and speech. When you recognize what someone truly desires or fears, you gain leverage. This awareness allows you to predict actions and craft responses strategically. Emotional intelligence directed outward becomes a powerful tool for influence and negotiation. Do not allow praise to intoxicate you. Compliments can be as dangerous as insults if they cloud judgment. When praised excessively, remain grounded and analytical. Ask whether admiration is genuine or strategic. Those who lose themselves in admiration become complacent and careless. Maintain steady focus on your objectives rather than external validation. Stability requires balance under both criticism and admiration. Practice emotional neutrality during confrontation. When tensions rise, maintain steady tone, controlled body language, and measured words. Emotional escalation weakens strategic clarity. Neutrality does not mean weakness. It demonstrates command over oneself. Opponents often expect visible anger or defensiveness. When those signals are absent, they lose psychological advantage. Composure in confrontation shifts the balance of power. Develop resilience through reflection. After every intense situation, analyze your emotional performance. Where did you remain composed? Where did you react impulsively? Honest evaluation accelerates growth. Treat mistakes as lessons rather than sources of shame. Emotional mastery is a continuous process of refinement. Reflection transforms experience into wisdom, ensuring you evolve stronger after each encounter. Detach from the illusion of fairness. The world does not operate solely on justice or morality. Accepting this reality prevents emotional shock when outcomes seem unjust. Instead of reacting with outrage, adapt strategically. Focus on what can be influenced rather than what feels unfair. Emotional stability increases when expectations align with reality. Adaptability becomes more valuable than resentment. Strengthen your tolerance for misunderstanding. Not everyone will see your intentions clearly. Attempts to constantly explain yourself often drain energy and expose vulnerability. Allows some misunderstandings to exist without correction. Confidence grows when you no longer feel compelled to defend every perception others hold about you. Emotional independence increases as your self-worth detaches from public opinion. Master the art of calculated empathy. Understanding others' emotions does not require absorbing them. Offer measured compassion without losing your objectivity. This balance allows you to build alliances without sacrificing authority. Excessive emotional absorption weakens clarity, but complete coldness isolates you. Strategic empathy builds trust while preserving control. Commit to long-term emotional endurance. Mastery is not achieved in a single victory over anger or fear. It requires consistent discipline across months and years. There will be setbacks, but persistence transforms habits into character. Emotional strength becomes visible not in isolated moments, but in sustained composure under repeated pressure. Over time, discipline solidifies into unshakable internal power. Control the narrative inside your mind. The stories you tell yourself about events determine the intensity of your emotions. If you interpret obstacles as personal attacks, you fuel resentment. If you frame them as strategic tests, you cultivate strength. Rewrite internal narratives to favor growth and calculation rather than victimhood. When you master your inner dialogue, you reduce emotional chaos and reinforce disciplined thinking in moments of pressure. Study your emotional patterns during success. Many people focus only on controlling negative emotions, yet excitement and triumph can also cloud judgment. Overconfidence leads to careless exposure of plans and intentions. When you win, remain observant and restrained. Celebrate privately if necessary, but publicly maintain composure. Sustainable power requires stability in both ascent and adversity, not dramatic swings driven by temporary emotional highs. Refuse to negotiate from emotional desperation. Decisions made from loneliness, fear of loss, or desire for quick relief often weaken long-term position. Before making commitments, evaluate whether your state of mind is stable. If urgency feels overwhelming, delay action. Clarity returns when emotional intensity fades. Strategic patience prevents agreements that satisfy short-term feelings but create long-term disadvantage. Recognize when distance is necessary. Some environments constantly trigger reactive behavior. Instead of repeatedly fighting emotional battles, remove yourself strategically. Distance restores clarity and prevents unnecessary escalation. It also communicates self-respect. Emotional mastery sometimes means walking away quietly rather than proving strength through confrontation. Withdrawal, when calculated, preserves energy for battles that truly matter. Develop the habit of observing without immediate involvement. In group dynamics, conflicts, or negotiations, listen more than you speak initially. Watch alliances form and tensions rise. Emotional detachment in observation reveals hidden motives and power structures. Once you understand the landscape, you can intervene with precision. Acting without observation leads to emotional miscalculation. Strategic observation ensures measured, effective engagement. Strengthen your resistance to guilt manipulation. Some individuals exploit empathy by inducing guilt to control decisions. Distinguish between genuine responsibility and artificial emotional pressure. When guilt is used as leverage, respond with calm logic rather than defensive justification. Emotional clarity allows you to help when appropriate and refuse when necessary without internal turmoil. Cultivate internal validation. When your sense of worth depends on personal standards rather than external approval, emotional stability increases. Define success according to your principles and long-term objectives. External applause becomes secondary. This self-contained confidence protects you from emotional volatility caused by fluctuating opinions or shifting social dynamics. Practice emotional endurance during prolonged uncertainty. Waiting for outcomes, results, or answers often creates anxiety. Instead of repeatedly revisiting worst-case scenarios, redirect focus toward productive preparation. Anxiety thrives in idle speculation. Discipline thrives in constructive action. By staying engaged in purposeful work, you weaken the emotional impact of uncertainty and maintain strategic readiness. Limit emotional exposure in strategic planning. When forming plans, avoid sharing details impulsively due to excitement or trust. Emotional enthusiasm can reveal intentions prematurely. Maintain confidentiality until execution is secure. Controlled disclosure preserves advantage and prevents interference. Emotional restraint in planning strengthens the probability of successful outcomes. Accept solitude as part of strength. Emotional independence may distance you from certain relationships that depend on constant validation or shared impulsivity. Solitude, however, sharpens clarity and reinforces self-reliance. Learn to find comfort in your own discipline. When you are content without constant emotional stimulation, you become less vulnerable to manipulation and more focused on deliberate progress. Master the discipline of emotional concealment. Not every feeling deserves expression. Strategic individuals reveal emotions selectively, understanding that visibility creates vulnerability. When others cannot easily read your satisfaction, anger, or disappointment, they struggle to predict your next move. Concealment is not repression, it is timing. Express emotion only when it serves a calculated purpose, never when it merely relieves temporary internal pressure. Transform anger into structured action. Raw anger clouds judgment and invites mistakes. Refined anger, however, becomes fuel for disciplined improvement. Instead of reacting outwardly, channel frustration into planning, skill development, or strategic correction. The world rarely fears loud rage, but it respects silent recalibration. When opponents expect explosion and receive composure, you destabilize their expectations and preserve your advantage. Guard against emotional exhaustion. Continuous suppression without reflection leads to internal collapse. Emotional mastery requires balance between restraint and processing. Schedule moments of private analysis where you examine accumulated tension. Release it through controlled outlets such as writing, physical discipline, or strategic planning. Strength is not endless tension. It is sustainable control maintained through deliberate recovery. Accept solemnity as part of strength. Emotional independence may distance you from certain relationships that depend on constant validation or shared impulsivity. Solitude, however, sharpens clarity and reinforces self-reliance. Learn to find comfort in your own discipline. When you are content without constant emotional stimulation, you become less vulnerable to manipulation and more focused on deliberate progress. Master the discipline of emotional concealment. Not every feeling deserves expression. Strategic individuals reveal emotions selectively, understanding that visibility creates vulnerability. When others cannot easily read your satisfaction, anger, or disappointment, they struggle to predict your next move. Concealment is not repression, it is timing. Express emotion only when it serves a calculated purpose, never when it merely relieves temporary internal pressure. Transform anger into structured action. Raw anger clouds judgment and invites mistakes. Refined anger, however, becomes fuel for disciplined improvement. Instead of reacting outwardly, channel frustration into planning, skill development, or strategic correction. The world rarely fears loud rage, but it respects silent recalibration. When opponents expect explosion and receive composure, you destabilize their expectations and preserve your advantage. Guard against emotional exhaustion. Continuous suppression without reflection leads to internal collapse. Emotional mastery requires balance between restraint and processing.
Schedule moments of private analysis where you examine accumulated tension. Release it through controlled outlets such as writing, physical discipline, or strategic planning. Strength is not endless tension. It is sustainable control maintained through deliberate recovery. Accept salinity as part of strength. Emotional independence may distance you from certain relationships that depend on constant validation or shared impulsivity. Solitude, however, sharpens clarity and reinforces self-reliance. Learn to find comfort in your own discipline. When you are content without constant emotional stimulation, you become less vulnerable to manipulation and more focused on deliberate progress. Master the discipline of emotional concealment. Not every feeling deserves expression. Strategic individuals reveal emotions selectively, understanding that visibility creates vulnerability. When others cannot easily read your satisfaction, anger, or disappointment, they struggle to predict your next move. Concealment is not repression, it is timing. Express emotion only when it serves a calculated purpose, never when it merely relieves temporary internal pressure. Transform anger into structured action. Raw anger clouds judgment and invites mistakes. Refined anger, however, becomes fuel for disciplined improvement. Instead of reacting outwardly, channel frustration into planning, skill development, or strategic correction. The world rarely fears loud rage, but it respects silent recalibration. When opponents expect explosion and receive composure, you destabilize their expectations and preserve your advantage. Guard against emotional exhaustion. Continuous suppression without reflection leads to internal collapse. Emotional mastery requires balance between restraint and processing. Schedule moments of private analysis where you examine accumulated tension. Release it through controlled outlets such as writing, physical discipline, or strategic planning. Strength is not endless tension, it is sustainable control maintained through deliberate recovery. Accept salinity as part of strength. Emotional independence may distance you from certain relationships that depend on constant validation or shared impulsivity. Solitude, however, sharpens clarity and reinforces self-reliance. Learn to find comfort in your own discipline. When you are content without constant emotional stimulation, you become less vulnerable to manipulation and more focused on deliberate progress. Master the discipline of emotional concealment. Not every feeling deserves expression. Strategic individuals reveal emotions selectively, understanding that visibility creates vulnerability. When others cannot easily read your satisfaction, anger, or disappointment, they struggle to predict your next move. Concealment is not repression, it is timing. Express emotion only when it serves a calculated purpose, never when it merely relieves temporary internal pressure. Transform anger into structured action. Raw anger clouds judgment and invites mistakes. Refined anger, however, becomes fuel for disciplined improvement. Instead of reacting outwardly, channel frustration into planning, skill development, or strategic correction. The world rarely fears loud rage, but it respects silent recalibration.
Understand that power favors the emotionally consistent. People trust and fear what they can measure. If your mood shifts unpredictably, your influence weakens. Consistency in tone, decision-making, and reaction builds a reputation of stability. When others know you will remain composed under stress, they hesitate to challenge you impulsively. Emotional steadiness becomes a silent signal of authority that requires no announcement. Train yourself to endure criticism without internal collapse. Criticism, whether fair or biased, is inevitable in any meaningful pursuit. Instead of defending instinctively, extract useful information and discard the rest. Emotional resilience grows when you separate constructive insight from emotional noise. A stable mind evaluates critique as data, not as an attack on identity. Master the art of emotional minimalism. Simplify your emotional responses. Not every situation deserves intensity. Reserve strong emotion for rare and meaningful events. When emotional reactions are scarce, they gain weight. Emotional overexpression dilutes impact and clouds judgment. Minimalism creates clarity, and clarity strengthens strategic decision-making in complex environments. Avoid becoming addicted to emotional drama. High-conflict environments can create a false sense of importance and stimulation. Discipline yourself to prefer calm productivity over chaotic excitement. Drama drains energy and distracts from long-term objectives. True strength lies in steady progress, not theatrical reaction. Emotional discipline rejects unnecessary turbulence. Build alliances without emotional dependency. Cooperation is strategic, but dependence weakens autonomy. Maintain respect and loyalty without surrendering independent judgment. Emotional dependence distorts perception and compromises decisions. Balanced alliances allow collaboration while preserving self-control. When partnerships are grounded in mutual interest rather than emotional need, they remain stable under pressure. Accept that emotional detachment requires courage. It is easier to react impulsively than to remain composed. Detachment may be misunderstood as coldness, yet it protects clarity. Courage is demonstrated when you choose restraint over revenge, silence over argument, and patience over impulse. Emotional discipline demands strength that few consistently sustain. Refine your response to betrayal. Betrayal often triggers intense anger or despair. Instead of reacting publicly, analyze the event privately. Identify vulnerabilities that allowed the breach and adjust accordingly. Emotional explosions reveal weakness, while calculated response restores control. Composure after betrayal signals that your stability cannot be easily shattered. Maintain control over facial expression and body language. Communication extends beyond words. Visible frustration or excitement can reveal intentions prematurely. Practice maintaining neutral posture and steady eye contact during negotiation or confrontation. Controlled nonverbal signals reinforce internal discipline and prevent emotional leakage that others could exploit. Prepare for isolation at higher levels of discipline. As emotional control increases, fewer people will relate to your restraint. Some may perceive you as distant. Accept this as a byproduct of growth. Depth of character often reduces breadth of approval. Emotional independence strengthens when you remain firm despite social misunderstanding. Conclude each day with calculated reflection. Review decisions, reactions, and interactions. Identify moments where emotion attempted to dominate logic. Plan improvements without self-condemnation. Mastery is maintained through continuous awareness. Over time, reflection transforms into instinctive composure. Emotional control becomes natural, and your presence commands quiet authority without force.